Morning broke slowly along the banks of the Rio Grande on April the 25th, 1846. A pale Texas sun rose over wide stretches of brush and river mist, revealing a tense frontier that no longer felt like the edge of a nation, but the center of a coming storm. American soldiers of General Zachary Taylor's army stirred awake in their camps, boots damp with dew, rifles stacked nearby, unaware that history was already moving toward them. Only months earlier, Texas had officially joined the United States. To Americans, the Rio Grande marked the rightful southern border. To Mexico, that claim was an act of aggression. Between those two beliefs lay a strip of contested land, quiet, empty, and dangerously uncertain. The soldiers stationed there understood one thing clearly. Both armies were watching each other, waiting for someone to make the first move. Patrols rode out at dawn, cavalry silhouettes cutting across the open plains. The land felt vast and exposed. Mesquite trees cast long shadows, and the river moved slowly beside them, calm in contrast to the growing tension. Every distant movement raised suspicion. Every dust cloud might signal approaching riders. Among the American troops were young volunteers from across the expanding United States, farmers, laborers, frontiersmen, many seeing Texas for the first time. They believed they stood not merely defending land, but protecting the future of their country. Texas represented opportunity, expansion, and the promise that America's destiny stretched far beyond its original borders. Then came the encounter. A small American reconnaissance patrol moved through disputed territory north of the Rio Grande when Mexican cavalry suddenly appeared. What followed was brief, violent, and decisive. Shots rang out across the quiet morning air, shattering the fragile peace that had held for weeks. When the smoke cleared, American soldiers lay dead or captured. News traveled fast. Riders galloped back toward camp, carrying word that American blood had been shed on contested ground. The message reached General Taylor quickly, and soon after, Washington itself. For many Americans, the meaning was unmistakable. The frontier had turned into a battlefield. President James K. Polk would soon declare that Mexico had shed American blood upon American soil, a statement that electrified public opinion. Newspapers across the country printed bold headlines calling citizens to rally behind the nation. What began as a border dispute instantly became a national cause. But on that morning along the Rio Grande, the soldiers did not think in terms of politics or speeches. They thought about survival. Defensive positions were strengthened. Cannons were repositioned. Scouts rode constantly, watching for enemy movement. The Texas frontier transformed overnight. Wagon tracks became supply lines. Open fields became military ground. The quiet riverbank became the dividing line between two armies preparing for war. What made this moment extraordinary was its scale of consequence. The clash involved only a handful of men, yet it would ignite a conflict that reshaped North America forever. Few present realized it then, but the shots fired that morning would lead to one of the largest territorial expansions in American history. Texas, once an independent republic fighting for survival, had now become the place where America's future power would be tested. As the sun climbed higher, soldiers cleaned their weapons and waited for orders. The uncertainty was gone. War was no longer a possibility. It had begun. And along the Rio Grande, the first chapter of America's rise toward continental dominance had just been written. By late morning on April the 25th, 1846, the tension along the Rio Grande had transformed into controlled chaos. General Zachary Taylor paced the leveled earth of his encampment, studying maps, adjusting troop placements, and issuing orders with a steady voice that belied the storm gathering around him. His soldiers, a mix of veterans and raw recruits, felt the weight of history pressing down on them. Every man understood that this was no ordinary skirmish. The eyes of the nation, and indeed the world, were upon Texas. The disputed territory was unforgiving. Dust rose from dry riverbeds, hiding hidden ditches and jagged rocks that could trip a horse or foot soldier in the chaos of battle. Mesquite trees, sparse yet treacherous, created blind spots for both observation and ambush. The river itself, calm in appearance, was lined with hidden mud banks and swift currents, a natural barrier that would shape strategy. Every movement had to be deliberate, every decision measured, because one misstep could mean death, and possibly the spark that turned a skirmish into full-scale war. Mexican forces, under General Mariano Arista, moved quickly to assert control of the disputed strip. Their cavalry spread across the plains like a dark wave, riding hard toward positions the Americans had recently scouted. Smoke from campfires drifted eastward, carrying the scent of cooking and wet earth, betraying the presence of American soldiers to observant eyes. Patrols darted forward and back, tension radiating from every man as they scanned the horizon for movement. The border that had been theoretical in Washington, D.C., now had tangible consequences. Soldiers' lives depended on it. When the first gunfire erupted, it was sudden, deafening, and disorienting. The sharp crack of a musket, the hiss of cannon, and the pounding of hooves tore through the morning calm. Taylor's men scrambled to defensive positions, rifles raised, eyes scanning the brush for approaching enemies. Tracers of sunlight reflecting off steel helmets made targets easier to spot, yet the smoke and dust created illusions, turning friend into foe in an instant. Every soldier relied on instinct, honed by drilling and battle experience, the kind that separates those who survive from those who do not. In the midst of this chaos, a small group of Texans stood out. Former frontiersmen, men who had fought for independence years earlier, understood the land, the danger, and the stakes. They moved with precision, covering flanks, guiding inexperienced recruits, and ensuring that no position went undefended. They were the embodiment of American resilience, practical, brave, and determined to protect the country they had sworn allegiance to, even in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. Behind the front lines, supplies were rushed forward. Wagons creaked under the weight of ammunition and provisions. Men shouted commands, and every second mattered. Artillery crews worked feverishly to load cannons with precision, aiming for positions that would maximize impact while avoiding friendly fire. The noise was deafening, a symphony of destruction orchestrated by discipline and adrenaline. Even as the battle intensified, Taylor remained a steady presence. He moved along the line, offering encouragement, correcting positions, and reminding his men that their courage had consequences beyond the battlefield. Every successful volley, every repelled charge was a statement to the world. America would not be intimidated, and the Texas frontier would remain part of the United States. By mid-morning, it became clear that the American forces were holding. The Mexican cavalry attempted multiple flanking maneuvers, only to be met with disciplined fire and coordinated counterattacks. The river, once a calm and neutral landmark, became a line of defense, forcing enemy soldiers into predictable paths where American troops could take control. The soldiers themselves felt the weight of history in every shot fired and every command obeyed. these were not just men fighting for land. They were Americans defending a promise that the United States would extend its reach responsibly, that Texas would solidify its place, and that the vision of a continental nation was not an idle dream, but a reality forged in courage, strategy, and sacrifice. As the morning sun climbed higher, the battlefield became a tapestry of determination. Dust, smoke, and mud painted the plains in shades of struggle, and yet through the chaos, the American spirit remained visible. From the smallest volunteer to the commanding general, every man understood one thing. The Rio Grande fight was not only about victory, it was about proving that the United States was ready to claim its place as a power on the continent. By late morning on April the 25th, 1846, the dust and smoke over the Rio Grande began to settle, revealing the first clear signs of the battle's impact. American forces, though smaller in number, had demonstrated coordination, bravery, and strategic ingenuity that left the enemy reeling. Every musket fired, every volley returned, and every disciplined maneuver told a story far greater than the sum of the skirmish itself. This was no ordinary border clash. It was a defining moment that showcased the resolve of a young nation and the value of Texas in its unfolding destiny. The Americans held their ground against repeated charges from Mexican cavalry. The river, once merely a line on a map, became a living, breathing defensive stronghold. Soldiers used its natural bends to funnel the enemy, guiding them into kill zones prepared with precision. Artillery crews, hands blackened with powder and sweat, unleashed carefully timed cannon fire, toppling barricades and halting advances before they could gather momentum. Every soldier on that ridge, along the riverbank, understood the stakes. The security of Texas, the authority of the United States, and the demonstration of American courage were all intertwined in their survival. Amid the chaos, individual heroism became undeniable. Texian volunteers who had previously fought for their own independence years earlier now stood shoulder to shoulder with American regulars. They scouted ahead, communicated silently with hand signals, and risked their lives to prevent flanking maneuvers. Their presence turned what might have been a simple skirmish into a powerful statement. That the frontier had produced men who could carry America's promise forward, men whose grit and ingenuity were unmatched anywhere in the world. Every life risked, every order followed, and every shot fired built not only a tactical victory, but a symbol of national pride. From Washington, D.C. to the hills of Texas, this clash reverberated as proof that America was ready to assert itself. News would later travel quickly, heralding the courage displayed along the Rio Grande and boosting confidence in the young republic's ability to stand against external threats. The strategic value of Texas, previously a contested territory, now became undeniable. With each maneuver, the Americans showcased their ability to combine skill, courage, and resourcefulness, qualities that would define the country as a continental power. By early afternoon, Mexican forces had begun a tactical withdrawal, their lines fractured, morale diminished, and their commanders realizing that the Americans had not only resisted, but controlled the battlefield. The Texians and U.S. soldiers, exhausted but triumphant, regrouped along the riverbank. Mud-streaked, bloodied, and weary, they looked at each other not just as comrades, but as living proof of a nation's potential. Each man understood the message. Texas was not merely a land to be claimed. It was a proving ground for American valor and strategic prowess. The consequences of this day rippled far beyond the Rio Grande. Strategists in the capital recognized that control over Texas secured a southern frontier, provided new resources, and demonstrated America's ability to defend its borders. The skirmish was small compared to the battles that would follow in the US-Mexico War, but its symbolic weight was enormous. It affirmed that Texas, a bold and independent land, was essential to the United States' emergence as a continental superpower. Soldiers returned to their camps with stories that would become legend. Tales of courage under fire, sharp instincts in the chaos of battle, and the unbreakable spirit of Americans defending their nation. These narratives, told and retold, helped to build an American identity that celebrated bravery, perseverance, and strategic foresight. For those who fought that day, and for generations that would follow, April 25, 1846, was not just a skirmish at a disputed border. It was a testament to what America could achieve when its citizens stood united, resolute, and fearless in defense of liberty and expansion. By the time the sun dipped toward the horizon, the Rio Grande stood quiet once more. The battle lines held, the men rested, and the nation's future had shifted in subtle but irreversible ways. Texas, with its vast lands and courageous people, had proven that it was more than a state. It was a cornerstone of American strength. And for the United States, this small but decisive border fight marked the beginning of a transformation that would cement its status as a continental superpower, capable of defending its borders, asserting its authority, and inspiring its citizens with stories of courage and pride. Victory was more than survival. It was proof. Proof that America could claim its destiny, and that Texas would always stand at the heart of that legacy.